And so I kept trying to find this magical new thing. And that was really frustrating to me. I was in a system that just wasn't a good fit in a lot of ways. There were a lot of beautiful, faithful people, and it was not a great fit. At the same time, it caused me to think, what is out there that is fulfilling and meaningful? And after looking, I finally realized that my phrase of "it hasn't been invented yet" meant that I was the one who needed to invent it, and that it wasn't just going to be some magical position.
Hi, and welcome to Feeling Beings Who Think. My name is Ariane Rice, and I'm really grateful that you are here. Today, I'm speaking with my colleague, Callie Swanlund. She is the author of From Weary to Wholehearted, a restorative resource for overcoming clergy burnout. But both of us agree that this is not just a topic or a book for clergy professionals. It is for anyone needing to take a break, to step away from the overwhelm and learn how to more compassionately, more wisely hold space for themselves. Callie and I last connected when we were learning and experiencing the Daring Way, a curriculum based on the research and methodology of Dr. Brené Brown. And it was a transformative experience for both of us. And I think in many ways the catalyst for waking up to what a vocational call, as opposed to just a professional identity, can be. And I don't think that is a clergy-specific insight at all. Our callings, our vocations, they change along with us. We grow, they grow. Change is the constant, not the context. And I love how she describes her awareness that there was a time, and I can relate to this too, when she tried to get the system to meet her where she wanted to be, but eventually came to understand that systems don't or won't always adapt to what we need them to be. We have to dream them. We have to create them by living them into being. Thank you so much, Callie, for sharing how you created and lived into being your work, this beautiful multi-vocational expression of the gifts you've been given and the skills you've cultivated to support others in their vocational journey. All right, thank you for being here, and now let's get to today's conversation. Good morning, Callie Swanlund.
Good morning. It's good to be with you.
So you and I have actually known each other for years, in the decades amount of time, but we are reconnecting in this conversation. So would you please introduce yourself and share with me and with us how you live your vocation in the world these days?
Love that. I love that. There's so many ways that I could answer, but I feel like on my website for a long time, I've had these 4 words, and they are mama, priest, creator, lover. And I think they're the 4 things that I try to strive into. Vocationally, yes, I am a mom of 2 tween and teens, and a partner to a creative. And my vocation, especially in the last several years, has been around living into my own creative ministry and empowering others in their creative ministry. I left full-time parish ministry in 2018 and then took about 4 years in half-time parish ministry and half-time building what I'm doing now, which I'll tell you more about. And then in 2022, I leapt and was like, okay, I'm ready to do my creative ministry full-time. What that looks like these days is I spend a lot of time in individual companioning work. Companioning is my word, my hybrid practice of a mix of traditional coaching and spiritual companioning. And it is a acknowledgement that we all need a companion along the way.
Oh, sure. Can I just say one thing about companioning?
Yeah.
I learned about the distinction when I was at an Orthodox monastery because in the Orthodox Church, they don't use the phrase spiritual director. They use spiritual companion.
They do.
Yeah, because they're in their theological understanding is you can't direct somebody in their spiritual life. You companion them.
Exactly. I love that. And I was on a plane once and someone asked what I do. And I told him that I companion people. And he drew a connection that might be obvious to others, but that I hadn't thought about. And it is that in Latin, the root cum is like with, and pan is bread. And so companioning is breaking bread with, which priests that's what we do. We break bread with. And I'd like to say about half of my ministry is doing this companioning work one-to-one with clergy, with lay leaders, with people who are seeking to find their spark in the world. And the other main half of my ministry, if you're a math nerd, don't add up these percentages. The other half is traveling around leading retreats, which is just so life-giving for me. And then because I had two halves to a whole and am a creative, of course, there are other things thrown in there. Writing a book this past year on overcoming burnout, from weary to wholehearted. And there's a church in my area that I'm at 2 Sundays a month. So I still have that connection to a parish. And I make fun, progressive faith design t-shirts on the side because I wasn't busy enough while writing a book. But actually what I realized is that what I write about in my book is that creativity is one of the antidotes for overwhelm. And I think I was intuitively leaning into needing to have another outlet while I was doing some intense work. So yeah, I've got these spokes to my ministry, and so I'm living out my vocation as a creative minister. The other term I've heard is priestpreneur in the world. And I love it. I love it every day. I love it.
Okay. Many questions.
Yes.
And this you are now what is becoming a longer line than I even anticipated of clergy who are no longer full-time clergy.
Wow.
So I would love it if you could go back to 2018, maybe 2017, 16, and talk about what was going on with you.
Yeah. Some of it predates that, in that during my discernment process, when people would say, "Oh, what kind of priesthood do you imagine?" I would say it hasn't been invented yet. And then I went through the traditional associate of a program size parish, associate of a corporate size parish, applying for rector positions trajectory. And in the meantime was like trying to convince dioceses to support me in like mission starts and other things like that they weren't always so interested in supporting. So I kept trying to find this magical new thing. But I was in a large system that I thought would be really keen on sharing resources with the wider church, but I felt was more interested in like doing things that, I'm going to be politic here, but doing things that fed their own system. And that was really stifling for me. It was really frustrating to me. I was working on some creative projects and had them shut down, and felt like my creativity and my dreaming went away for almost 2 years. And so I was in a system that just wasn't a good fit in a lot of ways. There were a lot of beautiful, faithful people, and it was not a great fit. And at the same time as all of this, my family had gone through tremendous transition and loss with the death of my former spouse's 2 parents. Both died. My former spouse and I went through a divorce, and my beloved parent, my step who I had lived with since I was 5, died in a 3-year period. And not being in a system that I felt like I could be my full creative self, and having gone through a lot of personal transition and loss caused me to think, hey, what is out there that is fulfilling and meaningful? And after looking at some jobs that I thought were going to fill that, I finally realized that my phrase of "it hasn't been invented yet" meant that I was the one who needed to invent it, and that it wasn't just going to be some magical position that was like a unicorn that I would be like, oh, yeah. I kept thinking it was on the West Coast, because on the West Coast,
they have a lot more unicorns over there.
Yeah, they're doing things like more creatively, and they've been post-Christendom for a long time, and they're willing to try some new things. Was in some job searches out there, and eventually decided, for my own sanity, the sake of my family, and letting this little seed of creativity grow, I moved back to Philadelphia. My former spouse moved back to Philadelphia, where we had been before that tumultuous 3-year period, and started working at a church half-time so that I could have the stability and flexibility to try on this new thing. And that was such a gift, because I realized how fed I was not being in traditional ministry full-time. And yeah, I love talking about it with people, because I think it's still really taboo. Is that how you experience it?
Yes. And I wanted to ask actually if we could talk a little bit about that 3-year period, because when you were describing it, and I was relating very much in my own life to similar circumstances, the way you were describing it made it sound very compartmentalized. Like I was doing this thing at church and this other thing was happening over here. And I'm wondering if it felt like that at the time, or.
Yeah. Especially when you're in a large church system, you're both incredibly public, like you're a very public figure, and it's impersonal in some ways too, because it's such a large system. And trying to figure out how to, for example, go through grief while still being a leader that other people could come to in their grief. Trying to go through divorce in a way that faithfully honored my former spouse and I, and didn't bring other people into it.
It's a very complicated. Yeah. I remember that was one of the first times we reconnected.
Yeah.
Because we met through the Daring Way, because knowing how, as a woman in particular, I think how to know, and I'm starting to see this a lot more now, that we clergy, we have this tendency to over-explain ourselves, or to start defending ourselves before there's any need to defend ourselves, because we have this inner voice telling us that we're doing it wrong, whatever it is.
Absolutely.
And when it comes to speaking to a person about either we are separated, or we are divorced, or we were divorced, or we were married, I'd love to hear your thoughts about what that was like for you, because I remember just tripping over my words and really needing some professional support of people, which included a little cadre of people, to give me the words to use and to let me know it was okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think trying to figure things out in a fishbowl, right? Like you're figuring things out on the fly while also being observed is really hard. And I know a lot of clergy feel, yes, this is what I signed up for, but also my life is way more public than I thought it would be. And I remember being a young seminarian and having like my field ed site and my little field ed committee. And they said, we just want you to be more open about yourself. And I look back now and I appreciate some of that feedback, because I can sometimes be guarded. But I also think what you're saying is true about, especially as women, that people feel like they have access to our personal lives. And now I'm a very public figure who writes really openly and vulnerably about my life. But even I get to decide. I get to decide what I'm going to share. And there's plenty behind the scenes that I don't share. And so I think figuring all of that out while you're in like a crisis or a really hard space is really difficult to do. Ultimately, I knew that I was leaving this particular parish. And we ultimately didn't share until after we left, because there was that whole navigation of parish letter. Do we talk about this? Would a doctor or a lawyer write to all of his clients? And
of course they wouldn't.
Say, this is what this is what my family's going through right now. It's so odd.
I just want that we're just a human being like everybody else. And I just think, and maybe we could just talk a little bit, because both of us went through that Brene Brown training, and both of us became certified Daring Way facilitators before we went through our divorces. How do you think that work? How did that work inform? Because she's huge now, and she wasn't
absolutely
as well known, and it's shifted a lot.
It's been almost a decade since we went through her training. Can you believe that?
No.
Yeah, I think it's shifted everything for me. I think I am more willing to have brave conversations now than I ever was before. And what I tell my clients when I'm coaching them through having a brave conversation is, it's not like I am like looking forward to them now. I still clam up and I'm like, oh my God, please, can someone save me from this? But I see the value in speaking our needs and speaking hard truths to other people. There's so many things I've learned from Brene, but I feel like going through that training means that you can't leave the hard stuff unsaid. And so it helped me grow as a person. It helped me grow in my ministry. It helped me grow in empathy for others, but also one of Brene's phrases is, do you believe that others are doing the best that they can? And I always want to gag and roll my eyes when I say it, but I also believe it at the same time, because I don't know if she adds this or if I've added this, but my full phrase is, can you believe that others are doing the very best that they can? And then can you respond accordingly? So if I believe that someone is showing up to their fullest, whether it be to a job, a marriage, a friendship, etc., and it allows me to have some empathy if I believe that really is the best that they can do. But it also allows me to have some boundaries and say, if this is how someone's showing up, is this what I need? How do I respond accordingly to that? So yeah, I like to say to people, if I quote something wise, if I say something wise, I'm probably referring to Jesus or Brene. I'm probably drawing on one of their words.
Yeah. And I think I was having a conversation with a colleague of ours who now has a consulting, Nathan Kirkpatrick, and we were talking a lot about integrity. And I think there's a lot of integrity in saying wisdom is wisdom and love is love and brave is brave. And so how else can we speak but from our own stories and experiences? Yeah. That it rolls out of our tongue, and then it's no problem saying whatever I'm saying that's wise, somebody else said it before me. I'm just saying it my way.
Absolutely. That's so true. And I don't know if you've experienced this over time too, over the last decade, but early on in the Certified Daring Way facilitation stage, I would use Brene's direct work. I would show her videos. I would use her curriculum. And at some point I shifted to probably a healthy mix of Callie and Brene. And now I would say my ministry is mostly Callie with a firm foundation but you incorporate those people, those voices into you over time. And so sometimes I'm quoting stuff and maybe I'm aware of the source. Maybe I can say, oh yeah, Brene said this in this book. But when you incorporate things over time, it's like oral tradition, right? Known wisdom. And so I think that's what I operate off of a lot is I think Brene has deeply influenced the known wisdom that I have. And I certainly draw on her, sometimes directly and sometimes just in my knowing, in my way that I conduct myself in the world.
So one of the questions that I have around the knowing and the growing because I also related to what you said, this idea of, I want to go into the institution and I want to have the institution make what I want to find the place where I will fit.
Yeah.
I want the institution to see what it's missing.
Mm-hmm.
I mistakenly, and in some ways, if I could go back in time, and I think I would rewind a bunch of conversations I had.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you just talk a little bit about your experience with that, which I still see in the church a lot? I call it rail against the machine. It's just the people, which was there's nothing wrong with it. People in an institution have to also say, these are the ways we need to change. I get that. But at a certain point, I too was like, Ariane, if you want to do certain things, you're just going to have to go out and do them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think, to be totally brutally honest, I was told in seminary, priests are going to have to be bivocational. You're going to have to be prepared for that. And I was like, I only feel called to be a priest. I don't really understand. Like, it was presented as, will you be a mail carrier and a priest?
Right. It's literally two things. It's literally a polarity. And one of which is supposed to be unpaid.
And I was like, first of all, I only feel called to be a priest. Second of all, and this is the brutal honesty part. Second of all, pension, right? Like,
of
pension
course
is really important, because once you have put yourself in this system and decided that that this is your plan for retirement, you have to stick with it. And so when I was full-time parish priest, getting my pension paid into by another, I think I was more likely to stay within the specifications of the system and follow the rules of the system. And in bishops, if you're listening, I still follow the rules, but in a different way, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I couldn't imagine a different way. And I think that causes frustration, like you're saying, in the people to be like, I'm stuck here. When I left the traditional structure of the system, when I chose a role where I have to pay into my own pension if I want to keep it running, it actually gave me so much freedom.
Mm-hmm.
It gave me so much freedom to reconceive of and re-embrace my priesthood. It's not like I'm like over here, the black sheep of my diocese. Like, I am fully living out my priesthood each and every day. And I am multi-vocational, not just bivocational. I'm multi-vocational, but all of those vocations are still being a priest. When I am companioning someone one-to-one, I'm a priest. When I'm out there leading retreats, I'm a priest. When I'm writing, I'm a priest. When I'm creating shirts that say respect the dignity of every human being and invite a stranger at Trader Joe's to open up to me about their non-binary teen who's voting in the election for the first time, I'm a priest. Mm-hmm. Like, I am even more fully a priest now that I'm outside of the system. And so I feel like it's given me freedom. And of course, I'm still critical of my institution in ways that are important, but I don't feel like I have to rail against the machine, like you said.
Mm-hmm. What the word that's coming to mind, and I'm thinking about, when in seminary, it's like we're becoming a priest and we see it as this thing, and we primarily see it as something that is defined by the context within which it serves, right? Yeah. So the priest is the person that's in a church doing these specific things. Yeah. But then what you're describing, which just takes time, is embodying and integrating the priesthood.
Absolutely.
So that the context is not what's important. What's important is the call within whatever context.
Yeah.
You are operating, or you
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's so true. And a lot of people that I companion are in parish settings. They range in denominations, but the same issues are present in many of our mainline denominations. And I think a huge part of my ministry at this point is saying, hey, I'm not in the everyday institutional slog. And so I have more spaciousness to heap love and nourishment and resources upon those who do feel stuck or who are trying to live out their vocation. I'm not trying to draw everyone over to this creative ministry side. I think it would be wonderful if more people embraced that aspect of their priesthood, but I'm actually trying to help people faithfully to themselves stay in a setting if that is where their gifts and call can come alive.
So I don't want to make, but I would love us to think of this in an agnostic way. Everything you're describing is not just about being a priest and working in the church. Everything you're describing is simply about how we show up in our work, in our life. So Absolutely. Why don't we pivot a little and talk about your book and talk about burnout and your story with that and how that came about?
Absolutely. Yeah. So the book title is From Weary to Wholehearted, but the subtitle is a restorative resource for overcoming clergy burnout. And my publisher and I actually had a back and forth on this because I was like, this isn't unique to clergy. It's really not unique to clergy. They made a good argument for the fact that clergy burnout is a hot topic right now, and having that in the title would be helpful. But I have many of my parishioners and lay leaders who have read this, and I have a parishioner who's a lactation consultant, and she just presented my work at her lactation consultant conference and traded out. She showed me where she like crossed out clergy and put like lactation consultant. She's like, it fits exactly in there. So I absolutely see it applying, like you said, across vocations. And like I said, I feel like a big piece of my call is holding space for people who are stuck, who are burnt out, who are overwhelmed, in particular, because I get to do the work that I really love to do every day. And I know that's not a privilege that everyone has, but it feels like it gives me some more spaciousness. And so in late 2020, when I had pivoted to offering my retreats online, I was ready in 2020 to start a brick and mortar co-working space for creatives here in Philadelphia and to be traveling and offering retreats. And obviously all of that changed for the pandemic. And so I was like, how do I still create embodied, meaningful experiences for folks who need nourishment? And so I started doing digital online retreats that with a twist. Like I had a bring your own cabin retreat where I encouraged people to book like an Airbnb or cabin near them, because this is fall of 2020, so that they could have a beautiful space and we could come together, but they could still feel like they were immersed in retreat. And my dear friend Heidi Carrington Heath, who's a UCC minister, reached out and said, what if we took your retreat ideas and we did an Advent quiet day? We first started as an Advent quiet day for clergy women. And we thought of these, we ended up doing them for several Advents and Lents. And I did some lay minister versions. And we thought of them as like love letters to our siblings in the world who were weary. And so when I started 2023, ready to write a book on a different topic, and my publisher reached out to me and said, are you interested in writing a book for weary clergy? And I said, have you been reading my diary? Yes. This is one of the topics that I would really love to write on, but not just clergy, just like weary ministers, weary leaders, etc. And it in and of itself is a love letter to people to say, first of all, you're not alone. I believe that adage that the preachers have 3 main sermons and that they like
3 is a lot.
3. My 3 are, You are a beloved child of God. Let your light shine, and you are not alone. I wanted to create a book that wasn't like an academic tome that told people about all of the brain science and things like that. There's a little bit, I touch on that in there for sure. But I wanted something that, like, if you didn't have the energy to crack open a really difficult text, you could find this accessible and you could read it. And at the very least, even if you didn't put any of the practices into place, you could say, oh, wow, I'm not alone. I feel alone. I had this giant Post-it. I don't know if I have it nearby, but I had this giant Post-it that I kept near me to remind myself who I was writing for and what kind of message I was trying to send them. Because to get into Brene stuff, oh my gosh, the shame gremlins come out when you're writing a book. And you're like, oh gosh, first of all, who am I to write a book? Second of all, am I going to be able to speak to everyone who opens this book? The answer is no. And that's okay. But you have to work through that. And I had to I sought some feedback from others at the very beginning of writing. And I panicked a little bit because I was like, I'm not going to be able to write what all of them want, which some people just wanted me to write a book that said patriarchy is evil and is causing us to be burnt out. And I was like, true. And there's more to it. And I want people to open this and actually feel empowered to do something rather than just point to something else and say, well, that's the problem. And I don't have any power over that. So then I got the feedback from others. I closed the door and I went into my cave and wrote what was already in my heart, because I knew that's what at least some people needed to hear. And that if there was some sort of academic tome that needed to be written, I trust that someone else will write that.
Yeah, I find it interesting that memoir, which I'm assuming this is part memoir. I'm assuming you're going to be sharing some personal stories in there, right? And that seems to be the way faith gets caught. There's this cute little quip, faith is caught, not taught.
Oh, I like that.
And we can, teaching dogmatic, doctrinal, divine statements about things is fine, but people do not have their hearts moved by that. And it's when people share the personal stories that moves hearts. What was a burnout story where you were like, this is not going to continue? It can't.
Yeah, I think when we go back to 2018, like we were talking about earlier, like that was my point of which I had stopped dreaming. And I made it sound earlier like I was ready to jump into this new thing. But at the time I was like, you know what? I need to say goodbye and step away, knowing that several doors are open, but that I don't have a solid one that I'm walking through. And that is in Atlas of the Heart, in Brené's latest, she talks about stress versus overwhelm. And in the state of overwhelm, you absolutely have to step away. You cannot make a decision or fix or solve something when you're in a state of overwhelm. And so for me, it was being able to say, I don't know what's next, but I need to leave this thing and make space for my own healing so that I can walk through that next door.
Can we just stop right there? This is something that I've been thinking about a lot, having only recently stepped away. Yeah. I know we have sabbaticals, which in the clergy world, they have sabbaticals, and some other worlds too. But this idea that we all need spaces where we can tap out and then tap back in. And part of it, I do think, is self-directed. We make choices to stay busy.
We do. I'm deeply inspired and influenced by the work of Tricia Hersey in the NAP ministry, and Rest is Resistance. Her book, Rest is Resistance. And as I understand it, her ministry, her work started as public works of art, where she would go and set up a bed and take a nap in a public place, which for a Black woman is an incredibly resistant, rebellious thing to do. And she regularly writes on her Instagram. When she does write on Instagram, she writes that she's pushing against grind and hustle culture and all of that. And she takes a sabbatical every year, completely off of, I feel like it's at least a month period. It might be longer than that, completely off of social media. And that doesn't matter if she's promoting a new book or project at the time. Nope, this is really important. And I admire her, and I learn so much from her. And sometimes I feel so challenged by her too, because I'm like, you can't step away during that time. What about that? But the idea that we use, this is a Brenéism, use productivity as self-worth is ridiculous. I was with a group of women from the cathedral in Denver a couple weekends ago. And we were talking a lot about busyness and productivity. And I reminded them that when God told Jesus at Jesus's baptism, "This is my son, the beloved, in whom I am well pleased," this wasn't after Jesus had healed people, had preached publicly, had done any of that. This predated that. God was pleased in Jesus. And I believe, by extension, us, I believe that gospel story to be about all of us in whom God is pleased. That was before Jesus proved anything, right?
Yeah. And in one of those accounts, right after that, he goes and takes a sabbatical. Days to hang out by himself.
Absolutely. 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 So what if we functioned on that as we are worthy when we wake up in the mornings? We're worthy before we do anything. But yeah, rest. So one of the central practices that I introduce in my book for overcoming overwhelm or burnout is retreat. And I think that goes beyond just rest, because retreat is time set apart. And there are people who don't even know how to take that. And I don't even just mean 3 days in the mountains. Take an hour this week and retreat with yourself.
Be with yourself. I think that's what's a little scary, is being with yourself.
Right? What might come up? That is the question. It's so wild. So many people I know don't spend any time in silence because who knows what might come up there.
Yeah, feelings will come up, and then the feelings immediately become thoughts, and then they become these rapid fire picture stories where we're either reflecting on or projecting forward. And
yeah,
what would it be to just stay with the feeling? We were both talking about our mutual friend, Erin Jean Ward, earlier, and I love, she said something in our conversation about, I'll just set like a 3-minute timer on my phone. Be like, I'm just going to feel this feeling for 3 minutes and then I'm going to move on.
I love that.
I know.
Love that. That is brilliant.
That's a really great, simple behavior change to start just getting yourself a little more familiar and comfortable with the experience of an emotion.
I like that. I took myself to a movie last night. I had a night on my own and I was like, I want to go do something. And so I went to, it was this romantic movie that I knew would have some really hard moments. No spoilers here, but in part, she gets cancer. And I went to it knowing that. And I walked out of the theater really melancholy and really sad, and texted my spouse to be like, I'm really sad right now. And he goes, that was the point of going to this movie, wasn't it? And I was like, yeah, It was. And I'm just going to sit with that. So drove home in silence and sat with the feeling of melancholy and sadness and didn't try to cheer myself up because I didn't need to. There's other sad things going on. And this movie allowed me to sit in sadness. And I thought, this is not fun.
Mm-hmm.
But does our life need to be fun all the time?
Can I ask a personal question?
Perhaps.
We'll see. But
you can ask. Yeah.
What was it that drew you to see a movie where you had some inkling that you were going to be in that sadness?
Absolutely. Yeah. This time of year is always hard for me. My annual grief day, which is the day that my Dave, my stepdad, died, is November 30th. And so from sometime in October, I always feel myself descending into, I call it fallen Callie, because it's like that coincides with the falling of the leaves. I feel like it's a time when we're allowed to remember that death is part of our life cycle. I feel like the darker days just meet me where I'm at. In part, it's that. In part, it's just deep sadness for the world right now. What's happening in Gaza and other parts of the world, our national politics, and just so many beloveds in my life going through their own internal struggles. And I keep a lot of it together. My role, my self-imposed role is the keep it together.
Well, you're the companion.
Yeah, I'm the companion and I love companioning people, but my own work is finding spaces where I can companion myself or be companioned by others, be held by others. And going to this movie was in part, it's like Callie date night with myself. But also, I tend to watch Grey's Anatomy or do other things at times alone because I can just be and I don't have to worry about anyone else saying, oh, gosh, Mama, why are you sad?
Okay?
Yeah. Are everything okay? Or whatever.
You're raising, I think, a beautiful paradox around Weary to Wholehearted, which is doing something that's going to help us release what we're holding on to is actually going to help us feel more wholehearted. It's not going to be an exhausting thing.
Yeah, I'm the sort of person, and I know you are too, who would rather sit down with someone over coffee and be like, okay, let's talk about your family trauma. Let's talk about what's going on really in your life. If we are spending time talking about the weather or the World Series or something like that, that's not going to hold my interest for long. Like, I'd rather go deep with people I can trust. I mean, that there is, Brene will say vulnerability and trust go together. I call them a dance. You need both. But I'm much more interested in wholehearted conversation than superficial conversation. And I fully believe what I practice in my retreats, what I lead people into is practicing that vulnerability and wholeheartedness, because I believe that if more people engaged in that, we would be globally in a better place. If we could talk about the hard stuff, if we could talk about feelings, if we could talk
if we could all get just a little more comfortable with silence and being with ourselves. Imagine what that would do for our conversations with people we don't agree with.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. Absolutely. We fill every moment. I often find that if I'm on like a road trip or driving to retreat, I don't force this upon myself. I find myself naturally gravitating toward leaving the radio off for the first part of the drive. And I noticed it as a pattern several years ago that I was like, oh, my body just is craving this. I brought some books. I'll bring those out when I'm feeling sleepy or something like that. I brought some audiobooks and some podcasts and some great playlists. But I really love driving in silence for long stretches of time, sometimes like 1, 2, 3, 4 hours. And that reminds me that my body must really, my brain, my soul must really need that.
So you said something too, and I'm noticing the time, and maybe this will be a good place to bring us home. is you talked about the change of the season and the darkness. And I think of that book, Wintering, who's the author I can't think of right now.
Catherine.
But getting to this point in our life where we're recognizing, oh, the seasons actually affect me and I want to be in rhythm with them versus not. So maybe talk as we move into the season, what you're doing for your wholeheartedness and where people can connect with you and what you want to close with.
I love that. So Catherine May is the writer of that book, and it's on my bedside. I have a few books that I savor, like over time. I'll pick it up for a little bit at a time. And so I'm savoring my way through it is how I like to say it. And I've been working with some of the people I companion on coming up with their own seasonal spiritual practices. In the summer, I think having like the equivalent of a summer beach read sort of spiritual practice is important. Like I'm going to go out and get an ice cream and sit on a park bench. And that's going to be my spiritual practice once a week this summer, not taking on like heavy tomes. So I think I love the idea of following the seasons. My spiritual practice in the summer is paddleboarding. And what I realized, I think last year, was that I needed like a colder weather practice because paddling isn't it. So this is my season of the sauna. I go to a sauna maybe once a week, and they have these like private little saunas where you can turn on anything. I turn on a sound bath meditation on YouTube, and I don't understand. Like you can see the past things that people have watched on YouTube in that particular room. And some people are watching TV shows and stuff like that. I'm like, this is prime meditation time. This is prime reset my soul time. I don't want to catch up on a TV show in here. I want to lay on this cedar bench and sweat it out while listening to some nature sounds or meditative sounds. So that is one of my fall practices. Tomorrow I'm doing a float. Have you ever done a float?
Oh yeah, I've done that. Yeah, we have those here in Baltimore. I've done it a couple times. It's awesome.
I've done it once before, but for anyone who doesn't know, it's a total sensory deprivation. And for me, what my spiritual needs are in this season are to be held. And I found myself in a recent spiritual direction session with my own spiritual director, sort of laying on my back in like a shavasana. If you are into yoga, it's just like laying on my back, and it's a combination of like release and being held. And I'm going to do a float tomorrow because you can have no sound, no light. The water temperature is your exact body temperature. And there's so much salt in there that you don't touch anything. You're just suspended, right? So some of my spiritual practices are about that, about being held, taking things slower, burning incense and listening to vinyl records on my sun porch. That's what meets me right now. I'm just into let's just slow down in the midst of the world, like screaming, let's go faster. So those will be my wholehearted practices. And I'd love to connect with people. I'd love to hear your wholehearted stories too. Ariane and I share the love for the phrase wholehearted. So you'll find me, my wholehearted wisdom reflections are online and through my newsletter. And all you have to know to find me anywhere is Callie Swanlund, Callie Swanlund. I am the only Callie Swanlund, and you can find me on Instagram, Facebook, callieswanlund.com, and connect with me there. Find out more about what I'm up to and what wholehearted reflections I have. And I would love to close you with a blessing from my book.
Lovely. Thank you.
This is a blessing from the section of my book that comes in ordinary time, which we are in. And it's called A Prayer for Returning. O God of growth, thank you for creating all things and calling us into continual co-creating. When the season feels long and the journey feels never ending, invite us to turn again toward you, toward one another, and toward ourselves. May we be as children longing for playful joy. May we offer our gifts to this weary world. May we persevere through it all. Give us this bread always. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much. That was beautiful. God of growth. I love that. What a beautiful conversation. I'm so excited. I'm so grateful. Thank you so much.
Me too. Me too. Thanks for inviting me.